Hello everyone, I'm Isabella Muir, author of the Sussex Crime Mystery series. The first trilogy of novels you can see behind me here, The Tapestry Bag, Lost Property and The Invisible Case, all feature a young librarian who becomes a bit of an Agatha Christie amateur sleuth and solves a range of crimes that take place in Tamarisk Bay and seaside resort in Sussex, and they're all set in the 1960s. But today I'm going to read an extract from my newest novel, Crossing the Line. Crossing the Line is set in 1964, and it's the first in a series featuring an Italian detective called Giuseppe Bianchi. Giuseppe has decided to take early retirement from many years as a detective in Rome, taking early retirement because of a terrible incident that occurred close to his home in Rome. And in this extract we meet Giuseppe just as he's leaving Rome to head off to England to stay with his cousin Mario, who runs a cafe in Bexhill-on-Sea in Sussex. Giuseppe Bianchi had never mastered the art of packing. His suitcase laid open on the blanket box in his bedroom for 2 weeks before his planned departure. At random times of the day and night he went to his wardrobe or chest of drawers and pulled out a shirt or a pair of trousers, tossing them into the case. As a result, the clothes were piled high in the centre, leaving gaps around the sides. The evening before leaving, he tried to inject some urgency into his preparations. He wandered from room to room in his flat, opening cupboards and drawers, hoping to catch sight of an item of clothing, of toilet or toiletries that might act as a reminder about what to include. He would be arriving in England in July. He knew it would be colder than Rome, but not as cold as his previous visit 10 years earlier. That had been for a 2-week Christmas holiday. On that occasion, he thought his repeated words of persuasion for Rosalia to accompany him might have worked. In the end, she remained resolute. She planned to stay at home, spend Christmas with friends. An English Christmas was not for her. On his return, he spent most of January back home in Rome trying to thaw out. This visit would be different for many reasons, not just the weather. When he visited Roma Termini to buy the train ticket, he couldn't decide on his return date. It was easier to buy a one-way ticket, but it meant packing was even more challenging. If he was uncertain how long he might stay with his cousin, how could he know how many belongings he should take? On the morning of his departure, after a sleepless night, he added 2 cotton jumpers to the top of his case. They were still in their shop wrapping, never worn. Whenever he wore a jumper, he felt constricted, as he did when he had to wear a tie. He wasn't oblivious to the admiring glances he received from women, but had no patience for preening in front of the mirror. He'd inherited his good looks from his father, the natural curls, dark brown eyes and olive skin. He could have his pick of women, but he was a married man, even though it was almost 3 years since Rosalia walked away from their life together. An hour later, as he stood on the pavement outside his palazzo, he couldn't recall if he'd turned the gas off. He'd wasted most of the morning spending it gazing out of his kitchen window at the skyline. In the distance he could catch a glimpse of the cupola of St. Peter's Basilica. That view was one of the reasons he'd chosen to stay in the flat, despite all the negative memories it held for him. The minutes he'd spent gazing meant little time to wash or shave and no time to double-check the gas feed to the cooker. The taxi arrived 5 minutes late. It was only as Giuseppe handed over his suitcase to be put in the boot of the car he realised he had never turned the gas on. He no longer prepared his morning coffee. He'd grabbed one at the station before catching the train. The taxi driver muttered to himself throughout the journey towards Roma Termini. Giuseppe was so used to the cacophony of sounds, the chaos of traffic, the frequent ambulance and police sirens, he barely heard any of it. Citizens of Rome were impatient to get on with their day. Once on the platform, he let the porter load his suitcase onto a flatbed trolley, along with the leather holdall Giuseppe grabbed, almost as an afterthought. In contrast to the hustle and bustle all around him, the porter walked slowly, pushing the heavy trolley ahead of him, weaving in and out of the crowds of people arriving and departing. Giuseppe had bought a first-class ticket. It was an extravagance, although easily justified now he was retired. His police pension was generous. For years he'd done nothing but work, his money accumulating, with little time to spend it. He had the carriage to himself for the first part of the journey down to the Swiss border. He read and dozed alternately. Then at Bâle, the carriage door slid open and a couple entered. He nodded. They smiled. "Do you mind if we move your suitcase over?" The man was speaking to him in English. It was a reminder that soon Giuseppe would have to get used to conversing in a foreign language. He had a good command of English, but little chance to practice. Some words were hard to pronounce, and many were impossible to remember. He would find the first few days with his cousin and family tiring, having to translate phrases in his head before speaking. Early evening, the attendant came through the train, making up the beds and advising passengers the dining car would open again for breakfast at 6 a.m. Giuseppe did not expect to sleep, but the train's repetitive movement lulled him into a deep slumber. It was only the voices of the English couple that woke him just after 6:30 a.m. "Are you stopping in Paris or going on to England? On holiday, are you?" the man asked. "England, but it is not an holiday." He spoke slowly, enunciating each word, enjoying the strangeness of the sounds, making a mental note about the English H. It always caught him out. It was only when he said the word that it was confirmed in his mind. Not a holiday, then what? A visit to family? An escape? When the train arrived in Paris, Giuseppe was ready at the door to the carriage, leaving the English couple fiddling with their luggage. He had crossed Paris on his last trip to England. He knew it was important to have francs ready and to be alert to the taxi driver overcharging him. It was the same the world over, he was sure of it. The last leg of the journey passed quickly. He was a good sailor, so the ferry crossing caused him no problems, but there was a sense of relief when the white cliffs appeared out of the mist. He was to take a train from Dover, and Mario had told him to ring on his arrival in Eastbourne. "I'll collect you, save you getting a taxi." He told his cousin, "I will arrive when I arrive. There is no need for any fuss. It is better you do not leave Anne alone in the cafe." "You don't change," his cousin had said. "Why would I want to change?" It was a conversation they'd had many times over the years, and one he reflected on often. Who was the most stubborn, his cousin or him? Perhaps both of them in their own way. Mario had spent half his lifetime in England, foregoing his childhood home in Rome, refusing to return even for a visit. Giuseppe knew the reasons Mario gave for not returning, but now that so much time had passed, they sounded more and more like excuses. After a change in Ashford and another in Hastings, the final part of Giuseppe's journey followed the coast, heading for Eastbourne. He caught glimpses of shingle beaches and a murky-coloured sea. Despite it being a summer's day, the sky was a milky white, much of the sunlight filtered through a blanket of cloud. He was due to arrive in Eastbourne at 6:05 p.m. Giuseppe glanced at his watch. He was 15 minutes away from his final destination. Suddenly, the train had screeched to a halt. Giuseppe pushed his face close to the window, trying to focus. It was as if the clouds had descended. All he saw were shapes, movements in the mist. A sea fret had drifted in, hiding the sun, giving the view from the window an almost dreamlike quality. He was alone in his carriage, but as he slid the door open, he heard raised voices. Many of the other passengers had left their seats to congregate in the corridor. "Why have we stopped?" shouted one elderly man, waving his walking stick at his companion. "Find the guard," wailed another passenger, a young woman, her hands clasped to her face. "Maybe someone pulled the emergency cord," the elderly man said, the authority in his voice a clear attempt at trying to calm the situation. Within moments, before the guard instructed him to do otherwise, Giuseppe seized his opportunity, opened the door nearest to him, and jumped down onto the railway track. He didn't turn to see the shocked expressions of his fellow passengers, but climbed over the track, walked across the railway crossing, and towards the emergency sirens that were approaching. You'll find Crossing the Line on Amazon in paperback, on Kindle, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.